What is the most important philosophical question? No, the most important fundamental question of our existence. Is there a God? If so, who created God? Is metaphysical dualism, as in the mind and the body, a real thing? What is reality? What is consciousness? Is there an innate moral code? Can I trust my senses? While these are all incredibly important questions on their own, I think they pale in comparison to one which gets often overlooked at times in the spontaneity of our humanistic curiosity and epistemologic nature. There is only one really serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. So claims Camus in his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. Albert Camus is one of the most prolific writers of French and universal literature of all time. His works on absurdism, nihilism, and even his fictional writings remain some of the most talked about and admired pieces of literature all over the world. To understand the question and answer that Camus brings, we have to dive into one of the greatest short stories ever written by yours truly. The Stranger, or L'étranger in French, is a novel that follows the life of our protagonist, Mersault, in French Algeria after finding out about his mother's death. Maman died today, or maybe yesterday, I can't be sure. This is the opening line of the text, and it does a brilliant job of portraying the detached and nihilistic character of Mersault. His cynical nature is further portrayed as he smokes cigarettes and drinks coffee at his mother's funeral next to her casket. Returning back home, he starts an affair with a former co-worker called Marie. They go to the cinema and to the beach together, and their relationship is characterized by physical attraction rather than emotional, at least on Mersault's part. Later on, he befriends one of his neighbors named Raymond, who invites him to his place for a drink. Raymond asks Mersault to help him write a letter for his mistress that he suspects of cheating. He agrees without much consideration for what implications there may be. The letter causes a confrontation between Raymond and his woman, but tensions escalate later on when Raymond, Mersault, and Marie, along with others, go to a beach house owned by one of Raymond's friends, where a confrontation between a group of Arabs, one of who is the mistress's brother, ensues. While walking along the beach, Mersault and Raymond encounter two Arabs. A tense confrontation ensues, and Raymond is wounded by a knife. The Arabs flee, and Raymond decides to seek revenge. Mersault and Raymond return to the beach, both armed with a revolver. They find the Arabs again, but Raymond is persuaded by Mersault not to shoot. Instead, they leave the scene, but Mersault keeps Raymond's gun. Mersault walks alone on the beach. The relentless sun and the shimmering light on the water overwhelm him, exacerbating his physical discomfort and mental confusion. He finds one of the Arabs facing him with a knife in his hand, the sunlight reflecting off the stainless steel of his blade. The heat, the blinding light, it was insufferable. Suddenly, the sweat in my eyebrows started running into my eyes. It was burning my eyes behind my glasses. I couldn't stand it any longer. And just at that moment, the Arab drew his knife from his pocket and held it up to me. The light shot off the steel and was like a long flashing blade cutting at my forehead. The sweat was pouring down, blinding me. All I could feel were the symbols of the sun crashing on my skull. And I pulled the trigger. He fires 4 more times at the motionless body, an absurd, meaningless act which encapsulates his existence from his point of view. After Mersault is jailed, he starts getting used to life in prison. However, instead of reflecting on the morality of his actions and the consequences that come with what he did, he mourns the physical sensations and pleasures like smoking and women. His trial turns into a public phenomenon, as his authenticity and uncaring attitude is viewed as inhumane and as a lack of empathy, which is exactly what the prosecutor focuses on to make his judgment, emphasizing his attitude regarding his mother's funeral, his relationship with Marie, and friendship with Raymond as moral depravity. Mersault is found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to death via guillotine, not even on behalf of the crime, but by the prosecutor's portrayal of Mersault being a moral threat on society. Mersault's reaction is one of resignation rather than one of shock or fear. While awaiting his execution in his cell, he recalls, "For the first time in that night, live with signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself, so like a brother, really. I felt that I had been happy, and that I was happy again." This is where Camus' philosophical beliefs really begin to shine for our protagonist, who he has used as a vessel to peddle his own spiritual and philosophical thoughts through, Camus ponders at the question of a meaning in life and arrives at the conclusion that existence in his eyes is just an absurd experience with no meaning or significance. Best characterized by the myth of the Greek legend Sisyphus, was a man punished by the gods to push a boulder up a mountain for the rest of eternity. A meaningless, mundane task. But what about religious retribution? Awaiting his execution, the prison chaplain visits Mersault, attempting to offer religious comfort, attempting to persuade him to repent. "Do you want my life to have no meaning?" he shouted. "But you're going to die anyway." Of course I knew that. I knew it, just like everyone else knew it. That eventually the sun and the heat and the thousands of other little details that had constituted my life would come to an end. But I thought that if I had to die, it didn't matter whether it was now or in 20 years' time. What was clear to me in a single stroke was that everything was an accident, and the darkness and the light were all one. Camus and Mersault reject finding solace in religion, viewing it as a sort of terror management theory and an easy way out, arriving at the conclusion that there is as much meaning in life as there is in death. Would then suicide just be the most plausible and most rational act in this nihilistic reality that we find ourselves in? Camus wouldn't stop here. There had to be something more meaningful to life than this nihilistic and bare acknowledgement. The Rebel is one of Camus' philosophical essays that is really overlooked in comparison to the myth of Sisyphus and his fictional works. However, it is essential as it marks a very important realization and change in Albert Camus' philosophical journey. In his search for that something more that he couldn't quite find earlier, he finally finds the concept of metaphysical rebellion. In his final moments, Mersault declares, "For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate." The core principle of this philosophy is rebelling against the absurdity of human existence, of the mundaneness and shallowness found in life, of the meaninglessness of it all. Metaphysical rebellion in this sense is responding to the coldness and indifference of the universe and its conditions. Camus advocates for rebellion grounded in individual consciousness, moderation, and a commitment to human dignity and moral values. He posits that true rebellion is not a means to an end, but an ongoing struggle against oppression and injustice in all its forms. This is where one truly becomes the absurd hero in a way, as Camus puts it. The absurd hero acknowledges his circumstances and the absurd, yet they do not give in to their nihilistic impulses of committing suicide or being miserable, but rather rebel in the face of it, learning to dance in the rain, whereas Camus frames it through his analogy of Sisyphus. I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again. But Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises rocks. He too concludes that all is well. This universe henceforth without a master seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy.